My grandfather was a Texas Ranger during the Great Depression. He passed away when I was still a young boy, so most of what I know about him comes from stories passed down by my father. But even secondhand, some of those stories are unforgettable treasures. And this one, in particular, has always stayed with me. As you can imagine, the Great Depression forced many desperate people to turn to crime in order to survive. Those already operating outside the law became even bolder, expanding their activities just to maintain the standard of living they'd grown accustomed to. It was a time when morality often gave way to necessity. Because of that, Cochran County became something of a hotspot for bank robberies in West Texas. Small towns like Morton, Whiteface, and Bledo found their banks and credit unions under siege. Some were hit almost daily. Many of the criminals who robbed the Bledo Credit Union tried to flee westward, aiming to slip across the New Mexico state line. The federal authorities eventually caught on and began stationing officers in Tatum to intercept anyone fleeing via Highway 125, a route commonly used by the suspects. But not all outlaws followed predictable paths. And despite the efforts of my grandfather and his fellow rangers, it often felt like more criminals were getting away than being caught. One case, however, burned itself into family lore. My grandfather had been pursuing a particularly dangerous bank robber who had shot a female teller in the back after she surprised him during a heist. Because of that, the manhunt was intense. Tips poured in from people all over the state who thought they'd seen the suspect or his getaway vehicle. One such tip came from a man who was nearly certain he'd spotted the fugitive's car parked outside a remote roadside motel called La Rosa Amarilla. The name stuck with me, the Yellow Rose. My grandfather decided to follow up, driving out to the middle of nowhere with his partner to investigate. The motel was run by an elderly couple, long since semi-retired, quietly living out their lives in that dusty patch of forgotten land. They welcomed my grandfather warmly, and told him how the motel had once been a bustling rest stop before the stock market crash turned everything upside down. By 1932, La Rosa Amarilla was little more than a relic, barely functioning, more of a halfway house for the lonesome and the lost than a business. They no longer kept proper records. Guests paid 50 cents, picked any available room, and left whenever they pleased. No names. No questions. No forms to fill. My grandfather described the couple as charming and obliging. They answered every question he and his partner had, even allowed them to search the grounds without resistance. The couple promised to contact the authorities if anything suspicious came to mind, but according to them, no one matching the suspect's description had ever checked in. Even if the car had indeed been parked there, they were adamant. The man hadn't come through their front door, hadn't spoken to them, hadn't taken a room. At least not officially. Grateful for their time, my grandfather gently advised them to consider logging guests in the future, just in case law enforcement ever needed to follow up again. And then he left, the trail having gone cold. Before long, he and his partner were forced to shift focus to new cases and new fugitives. Months passed. Then, while investigating an entirely unrelated robbery, La Rosa Amarilla appeared once more. A witness this time, a guest staying at the motel, claimed to have seen the very same suspect entering one of the rooms. The man had been carrying a satchel that looked just like the ones often used in liquor store holdups. It was a strong lead. Too strong to ignore. So my grandfather returned to that quiet, crumbling motel in the desert. And just like before, the story hadn't changed. The couple still kept no records. There was no trace, no signature, no official presence of the suspect. Just a vanishing figure in the dust, forever slipping through cracks in the system. After showing the elderly couple a photograph of the suspect, something finally shifted in their expressions. The woman squinted at it for a long moment before turning to her husband with a look that said, "Does he look familiar to you too?" The old man gave a slow, uncertain nod. Yes, they admitted, he did look vaguely familiar. They couldn't say when or for how long he might have been there. Perhaps he'd come through recently. Or maybe it was a month ago. It was hard to say. Their memories weren't what they used to be, they said, almost apologetically. At the time, my grandfather and his partner still had no reason to suspect the couple of anything more than being forgetful. And yet, something about their vague responses and frequent shrugs began to irritate them. My grandfather had always been a patient man, especially with civilians. But deep down, he couldn't shake the growing sense of frustration. If this had been any other motel, one with proper logs, actual staff, a manager who cared, he might have had the suspect in cuffs by now. Still, there was no concrete evidence. So they left La Rosa Amarilla again, this time with even fewer answers than before. Several more months passed. New robberies. New leads. But then, as if fate were toying with them, the name La Rosa Amarilla appeared again, this time in connection with an armed liquor store robbery not far from the state line. A witness had come forward, claiming to have seen the suspect checking into the same Yellow Rose-named motel, behaving oddly. According to the statement, the man seemed paranoid, avoided going outside during the day, and kept the blinds drawn tight. The strangest part? He wasn't the one running errands. Instead, it was the motel's elderly proprietor, the same quiet man who had once insisted he never saw anything, who was reportedly bringing him food, cigarettes, and even extra linens. He came and went from the room regularly, often at odd hours. That testimony changed everything. My grandfather and his partner returned to La Rosa Amarilla for the third time, but this time they carried suspicion in their pockets like loaded revolvers. They weren't just following a lead anymore, they were testing a theory. The old man met them on the porch as he always did, rocking slowly in a creaking wooden chair with a faded cushion. He smiled like nothing had changed, offering them lemonade as if they were old friends stopping by. But my grandfather didn't smile back. He handed the man the photo again, only this time, with a quiet edge in his voice, he asked him not if he recognized the suspect, but when he last saw him. The old man hesitated. His eyes darted, not to his wife, not to the photo, but toward one of the empty rooms across the courtyard. Just for a second. It was subtle, but my grandfather noticed. He always noticed. "Yes," the man said eventually. "I think he might have passed through. Briefly. Can't be sure though." But my grandfather already knew that wasn't the full truth. The key moment came when he asked the old man a deceptively simple question. "Were you ever in the room long enough to get a good look at him?" And that was when the old man lied. It was in the hesitation, the way his tongue moved across his bottom lip, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the too careful tone of his voice. "No," he said, shaking his head just a little too deliberately. "No, I never really saw his face. Not clearly, anyway." My grandfather didn't call him out. That wasn't his way. Neither he nor his partner accused the man directly. They didn't raise their voices or flash their badges or threaten jail time. Instead, they just stood there quietly for a few moments, letting the silence stretch. Then they thanked him for his time, just like they always had. But this time, they didn't drive off right away. They sat in their car just beyond the edge of the property, engine off, watching the motel from a distance. Waiting. Thinking. Back at headquarters that night, my grandfather's partner voiced what they'd both been suspecting. "I think it's simple," he said. "They're hiding him. Or they've hidden others like him." It was hard to argue with. Maybe the couple hadn't meant to get involved at first. Maybe it had started with a favor, a frightened man offering too much money to turn away. Maybe they'd convinced themselves they were doing no harm. But by now, it was clear, La Rosa Amarilla wasn't just a rundown stop for weary travelers. It was a safe house. A ghost motel for ghosts who needed to disappear. And the kind old couple? They were its gatekeepers. It soon became clear what had been happening at La Rosa Amarilla all along. The elderly couple had been offering shelter to fugitives, not out of fear or naivety, but as part of a calculated deal. In exchange for sanctuary, the criminals left behind a cut of their loot. A quiet arrangement. A hidden economy. Not everyone who stayed paid 50 cents for the night. No. For certain guests, the price of a room wasn't pocket change. It was $50, sometimes even $100 per night. And in the 1930s, That was no small sum. That was hush money. That was silence bought by the ounce. The real problem, though, was proving it. My grandfather and his partner had already searched the place from top to bottom, checked every room, every floorboard, every scrap of paper they could find. And they came up empty-handed. If the couple was hiding evidence, they were doing it with the care of seasoned professionals. Time passed. La Rosa Amarilla disappeared from the radar, as if the motel itself had folded back into the dust. For months, nothing. Then, unexpectedly, they caught a break, a real one. The tip came from a captured bandit, arrested by a different agency on an unrelated charge. Bitter and angry, he was sitting in a jail cell when he asked to speak with my grandfather directly. The reason? He felt betrayed. According to him, his former partner had sold him out, had abandoned him during a heist and left him behind for the law to scoop up. And worst of all, the man had pocketed the entire share of their stolen money, ignoring the code they had agreed on. They'd made a pact: if one of them got caught, the other would make sure the arrested man's family was taken care of. But loyalty is rare among thieves, and greed is much more common. The bandit was livid. He wanted revenge. And so, he started talking. He told my grandfather that the rendezvous point, the place where they met, split money, laid low, was a shabby little motel in the middle of nowhere called La Rosa Amarilla. It was more than a hideout, he said. It was a haven for criminals, run by a sweet-faced old couple who asked no questions and made sure no one asked them either. In return, they received a share of the stolen goods. A cut of every job. When my grandfather's partner heard the name, he nearly exploded. "God damn it!" he shouted, slamming his hand against the table. "I knew it! I knew it from day one!" And yet, despite this bombshell, one crucial question remained: how were the old folks helping these men vanish so completely? Even the prisoner couldn't answer that. He admitted that whatever magic trick the couple used to erase people from the grid was something he never fully understood. It just happened. You paid. You stayed. And when you left, no one could trace you. That uncertainty made things complicated. Without evidence of the method, they still couldn't make an arrest. And their superior was growing restless. Every week brought new pressure from above: find something. Get results. Stop coming back empty-handed. My grandfather was a man who didn't believe in half measures. For weeks he barely slept, going over every possible angle, every theory, every missed detail. There had to be a way in. And then they came up with a plan. It was bold. Risky. But it might just work. They decided to insert someone into La Rosa Amarilla. A third ranger. Someone the elderly couple had never seen before. Someone who could pose as a wanted man, fresh off a big robbery, needing a place to disappear. A baited hook disguised as prey. The man they chose for the job was a natural. A born performer. The kind of guy who could slip into a new skin like other men slipped into jackets. He'd spent years dealing with outlaws, knew how they talked, how they walked, what they wanted, and what they feared. He was rough around the edges in just the right way. Believable. Dangerous. Charismatic. To a couple like the owners of La Rosa Amarilla, he would seem like the perfect guest. The plan was simple in theory. The undercover ranger would show up at the motel, claim to be on the run, and offer a generous payment for a few nights of silence. The rest of the team would stay close but hidden, ready to move in the moment the couple made their move, or revealed their secret. Now all they needed was time. And patience. Gaining the trust of the couple was the first and most delicate step. They couldn't simply storm the place with accusations and warrants, not without evidence. So the plan relied on patience, subtlety, and performance. Their undercover ranger, posing as a desperate fugitive, was the key. He arrived late in the evening, dusty from the road, dressed like a man who just robbed a bank and barely escaped with his life. He parked his beat-up car near the front office and walked in with a tense, calculated urgency. Minutes later, he emerged, calm but tight-lipped. He had spoken to the couple. They'd made him an offer. If he ever found himself truly cornered, If the law was hot on his heels, and if he brought a few $100s to the table, they would help him disappear. Not just hide. Vanish. According to them, for the right price, they could get him across the border into Mexico where, in their words, not even God would find you. All that remained was to choose a date and time. That's when my grandfather's partner had an idea. They would broadcast a fake radio alert. A breaking news bulletin reporting a violent bank robbery and a massive manhunt underway. It would sound real. It would sound urgent. And it would set the stage perfectly. On the agreed-upon day, the operation went into motion. My grandfather and his partner climbed a rusted water tower less than a mile from La Rosa Amarilla, positioning themselves with binoculars to watch the trap unfold. They had no drones, no hidden cameras, no audio surveillance, just their eyes and a silent prayer that it would all go according to plan. Then, like thunder on a clear day, their colleague came barreling down the dusty highway, kicking up a plume of dirt behind him, doing nearly 100 miles per hour. He slammed the car to a stop, leapt out, and charged into the front office, yelling at the top of his lungs that the police were right behind him, that he had cash in the trunk, and that he needed help, now. The old man didn't hesitate. Without so much as a glance toward the horizon, he rushed to help the undercover ranger push the car behind the building into a half-collapsed garage overgrown with weeds. Then came the part they'd all been waiting for. The moment that made my grandfather's heart catch in his throat. The old man led him behind the main building, toward a part of the motel no one had ever searched. A place that, until then, they didn't even know existed. What happened next, no one watching could fully see. The ranger disappeared with the couple into a structure obscured from view. It was there, they assumed, that the couple would finally reveal the method behind the disappearances. The how. The secret. That was the moment he was supposed to act. As soon as the method was clear, he was to pull his weapon, restrain the couple, and signal the others. But time stretched on. 5 minutes. Then 10. Then 20. My grandfather and his partner exchanged looks. Their nerves frayed with every passing second. Still, they waited, hoping their man was just buying time, gathering intel, playing it smart. But after nearly an hour, and no sign, no signal, no return, they knew something had gone wrong. They mobilized immediately. This time, they didn't go in quietly. They brought backup, Texas Rangers, local sheriffs, even 2 federal agents who had come in from planes after hearing a ranger might be in trouble. They swept the property with a purpose, knocking down doors and tearing up floorboards. But La Rosa Amarilla had played this game before. It was a master of hiding what didn't want to be found. And then the dogs arrived. These weren't search and rescue dogs. They weren't trained to track missing persons or sniff out clothing. No, these dogs were trained to detect blood. And they found it. A lot of it. Behind the old garage where the fugitives' cars had been hidden for years, there sat a rusted-out truck. Its flatbed was filled with trash and sun-bleached lumber, as if someone had tried to make it look forgotten. But the dogs didn't care about the truck. They were interested in the dirt beneath it. Snarling and digging, they unearthed dark patches in the earth, stains that didn't belong. And the scent was unmistakable. It was iron. It was rot. It was the smell of something violent, something final. My grandfather's partner pulled back the tarp. And what they found underneath changed everything. Trained to follow the scent of blood with precision, the dogs circled the rusted truck, then suddenly stopped, rigid, alert, focused on one specific spot beneath it. Their handlers gave the signal. The Texas Rangers moved in without hesitation, ordering the truck to be hauled aside. A cloud of dust and old rust rose into the air as the vehicle groaned across the gravel, revealing the patch of earth the dogs had marked. They knelt and began clearing it by hand. At first, it seemed like nothing. Just soil, rocks, debris. But then a strange texture emerged beneath the dust, a mat or tarp, camouflaged to blend in with its surroundings. They peeled it back carefully. What lay underneath sent a chill down every spine. A large iron trapdoor, flush with the earth, its hinges sunken and rusted from decades of use. The kind of thing you'd never see unless you were looking directly at it. And even then, only if you knew it was there. They pried it open with crowbars. A slow groan of metal echoed through the air as the door lifted, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading into the ground. What waited below was no mere hideout. It was a bunker. Or more accurately, a death chamber. What the Rangers found beneath La Rosa Amarilla defied belief. The first room was stark and clinical. Bare concrete walls, a single drain in the center of the floor, and a long rubber hose coiled in the corner. A place built not for hiding, but for execution. The scent of bleach couldn't mask the coppery undertone of blood that clung to every surface. Just beyond that was another chamber, larger, colder, worse. A processing room. But what they discovered there wasn't a site of hurried burial or body disposal. It was the opposite. The elderly couple hadn't been trying to erase the people they killed. No, what they'd done was far more twisted. They preserved them. The bodies had been embalmed, coated in a thick, glossy varnish that sealed the skin like lacquer, halting decay. Not unlike taxidermy. Each corpse had been carefully cleaned, clothed in fresh garments, hair combed neatly into place. Their faces, frozen in a final, unnatural stillness, were turned toward one another. Because they weren't kept in boxes. Or hidden in freezers. They were seated. Arranged. In a small, windowless parlor deep beneath the earth, the dead sat together as if caught mid-conversation. Some held books. Others appeared to be listening to an old record player in the corner. There was even a poker table, a game in progress, cards laid out, as if they'd been playing for hours, forever. And it wasn't just one or two. There were dozens. The most disturbing part, though, wasn't the method. It was the motive. When questioned, the old couple insisted they hadn't done it out of cruelty. They didn't enjoy the killing, they said. They felt pity for these men. Claimed they only targeted fugitives, bad people, who wouldn't be missed. They spoke of it not like a slaughter, but a mercy. They claimed they would never have harmed the undercover ranger had they known he was law enforcement. But he had revealed his identity too late. The old man struck him with a hammer, panicked, they said. By the time the authorities arrived, the ranger was already barely clinging to life, having lost most of his blood. They had begun preparing him for preservation, just like the others. According to them, burying the bodies would have drawn too much suspicion. The ground was dry. The land too open. People would notice disturbed soil, heavy digging. So instead, they said they'd done the best they could. They built a room. A peaceful one. A quiet eternity. They created a museum of the damned, where the criminals they killed could rest forever in a staged harmony. A grotesque illusion of comfort. Jazz records. Bookshelves. Cigar boxes. Dead men with painted smiles, seated like guests at a party that would never end. And no, this isn't a joke or an urban legend. The furniture in that underground mausoleum, the plush chairs, the polished oak table, the record player spinning dusty jazz, it had all been purchased with blood money. Literally. The cash they'd taken from the very men they murdered had been used to create what they called a final resting place. A twisted attempt at atonement. They viewed it as a form of restitution. As if spending the money on comfort for the dead somehow balanced the scales. As if preserving their victims in wax and silence made up for the hammer blows and blood stains. But it wasn't just the 3 fugitives my grandfather had been hunting. They'd found 4 more bodies down there. 4 more men, criminals, yes, but human beings nonetheless, who had disappeared over the years. Each was said to have carried large amounts of stolen cash. All of them had vanished without a trace. Until now. The truth revealed a slow, methodical killing spree that stretched back over a decade. A quiet horror story buried in the Texas dust. Back then, it was the biggest case Cochran County had ever seen. For months, it was all anyone talked about, from the local diner to the sheriff's office. But it never reached national headlines. There was no sensational trial. No dramatic court proceedings. No chance for the media to turn it into a spectacle. Because justice never came. The old man died of a heart attack in his jail cell before he could be brought to trial. And his wife, frail, already in the final stages of terminal cancer, passed away in her sleep the night before her first scheduled court appearance. Some said it was guilt. Others said it was convenience. Either way, the truth died quietly with them. My father once told me that my grandfather never forgave himself for sending his partner in first. He used to say, with a hollow kind of conviction, "It should have been me." Over the years, the weight of that guilt carved deep grooves in him. And maybe that's why he drank the way he did. Maybe that's why he died before I ever had the chance to truly know him. All I have are the stories. And this one, this dark, tangled knot of justice, deception, and misplaced mercy, was the one that stayed with me the longest. That old couple, they believed, with unsettling sincerity, that they were doing the right thing. That they were helping clean up the world. That they were protecting people from men beyond redemption. But their version of morality was laced with madness. And somehow, they became a permanent part of my family's story. To this day, I still struggle to wrap my head around it. How two people who looked like anyone's sweet grandparents could calmly sit atop a mass grave and call it a sanctuary. Because in their minds they weren't monsters. They were caretakers.